Welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, we're going to be focusing on Simplicity Pattern 1773, which is part of the Medieval Dress series. In this particular tutorial, we're going to be tackling the overdress seen here. Now, we're going to be doing the short version, but if you want to do the longer one, you could probably follow along most of the steps with us, as there are many similarities. If you're interested in doing the underdress seen here, you can check out our other tutorial in this same series. So now let's take a look at the overdress that we're going to be completing here. Here you can see an example of the overdress that we're going to be creating today. You can see that we use the ribbon to accent the bodice and it ties in the front. We've also used studs as an accent. That is entirely optional, but I'll show you how to put those on. It has detachable sleeves and the hemline is hand cut, so it's definitely a different hemline than what is normally done for a dress. So let's get started and taking a look at the back of the envelope to see what we're going to need. The back of the envelope is going to give us all the information about what we're going to need in order to complete the project. So the first thing is going to be fabrics. So this is their suggestion of fabrics to use for this. And you'll notice they have a section for the AC and then for view B and D. So this is AC is the underdress and BD is the overdress. So they have two different recommendations that they have. So once you have your fabric, then you can move on to notions. So notions are additional items that you're going to need in order to complete it. So the first thing is, no matter what your project is, you're going to need matching thread. And it's all right to use all-purpose. And they split it up. So for the underdress AC, you're also going to need a zipper and a hook and eye, and then some buttons. And then for B, you're going to need some iron-on studs. And if you're doing B or D, you're also going to need some snaps. Next, we move on to body measurements. So this is where you use your body measurements in order to find out what size you're going to be. And this is helpful for when you're figuring out how much fabric you need and also for cutting out your patterns. So you're going to measure your bust, waist, and hip. And if you need help on doing that, definitely check out our video on how to take your body measurements, and we'll show you exactly how to take your full body measurements and then line them up with your size. But essentially, you're just going to find the group that best represents you. And then whatever that row is going to be, you're going to go down and you'll see pattern size is right below, and you're just going to go over and be like, oh, okay, so I'm a size 12. So everything that's in the size 12 column is then going to be for you. So that's helpful when you're trying to find out how much fabric you're going to need. So once you know your size, you're then going to find what project you're doing. So if I'm doing dress A, I can decide if I have 45-inch width fabric or 60-inch width fabric. So whatever you buy, then that's going to be the one that's going to pertain to you. So if I get 60-inch, I'm going to go, okay, 60-inch, go over to my column, which is size 12, and then there it's going to tell me how much fabric I'm going to need right there. So once you have that, definitely still look down at the rest of the stuff, because even though you know it moves on to B and C and you're not doing that, you're only doing A. If you look down here, you'll see AC interfacing. So definitely we need interfacing if we're doing dress A, and so it says we need 7/8 of a yard of lightweight fusible interfacing. So that's why it's important to just take a quick glance and see everything else. So then also the same thing. If I'm doing the overdress, it's the same thing, finding out how much yard, but then we also have additional ribbon that we also have to get. And then if you keep looking down, all of a sudden you see BD lining. So this is also for the overdress, and we also need lining, and it's telling us how much we need. Then you also need interfacing and you need boning for this one. So that's why it's important that even though it seems like all the information is up here, just take a quick look down and see if there's additional things. So once you have everything that you need, we can go ahead, open up our envelope, and look at our inside directions. The very first thing we're going to see on page 1 of our directions, you're going to see a breakdown like this. So these are the individual pattern pieces that are going to be in this envelope, and each of them correspond to one of our projects over here. So once you decide, okay, I want to do project A or project B, you're going to look down here and you're going to see they're all labeled and they have a number next to them, and this number goes with the same number up here. So everything corresponds. But behind whatever the pattern is labeled as, you'll see a letter, so AC. So this means that if I'm doing either project A or project C, I'm going to need to cut out pattern 1. If we go down here to number 7, the back trim, it just says A. So if you're doing C or B or D, then you don't need to cut out this piece. Only for people who are doing project A will need to cut out piece 7. So you just need to mark, I just put a little check mark next to each one that has my letter. And so then I know, okay, I need to cut out pieces 1 through 11 if I'm doing project A. So then here I can see what those pieces look like on my actual pattern pieces. So next I'm going to grab the tissue paper and we'll take a quick look at that. When looking at your tissue paper, you're going to see all of the pattern pieces and you need to locate your pieces. Luckily, there's a number on them. So this number that's big, that is the number of the pattern piece, so number 5. So if I need to cut out 5, then I would cut this out. Also, it has the name, yoke back, so that helps too, and you can connect that back to the chart that we just looked at. And it also says AC. So if I'm doing project A, this is another indication that I need to cut out this pattern. But sometimes there'll be more than one. Like in this particular case, I have a number 5 here and a number 5 here, even though this one's upside down. I don't need to cut out both of them. The reason why there's more than one is because different sizes. So this particular one, if I'm looking sizes, it's for size 6 and 14. This one, size 10. So if I'm cutting out size 10, I can go ahead and cut out this number 5, and I don't have to worry about this one. Now some pattern pieces, there'll only be one, but there'll be a series of lines. Like this one is size 6 and 14. So if I'm cutting out size 6, then I'm going to follow this line. If I'm cutting out size 14, then I'm going to follow this line out here. So if you have to be careful then when you're cutting out your size, if there's lines, especially when they cross here, that you're following exactly where you're cutting out. So for 6, I'm going to go up here, across this line 14, and then down here. You'll see 6 again is here. And then where there's no number, that means it's for both of them. So that's where it's really handy. So here is one that's cut out. This is for the size I'm doing, size 12. And you'll see I cut right along the line, and wherever I have a notch, I make sure that I cut out my notch. You can also do an inverted notch as well, whatever you're comfortable doing, so you have some sort of indication that there's a notch there, because this is very important when it comes to the placement of our pieces. Here is a double notch. Just make that look a little bit different than my single notch by just making sure the top is blunt. So I just cut off the top there. So once you have all your pieces cut out, then we can go ahead and start with the layout. Now we're going to look at the layout for the overdress, and this is going to be at the bottom of page number 1. So you'll see here they label it as B overdress, and they show you a layout here. And if I was to scoot this down, you'll see a little guide here. So if it's dark, that means that the pattern is upside down. So it's laid so the printed side of the pattern is facing down towards the fabric. And if it's white, that means the printed side is facing up towards you. So if I move this back, you can see how that setup is here. Like these ones here that are dark, those are upside down, and then all the white ones are facing up. Now, some of these patterns or pattern pieces are so small in this layout, they have to list the numbers over here. So if you need to just match it up, that's what you need to do. So this is showing you how they recommend that you lay out your pattern pieces so you make the most out of the fabric that they tell you to get. Now this one right here, you'll see is for 44 and 45 inch width fabric. So if you happen to get 58 and 60, then you're going to have to do a different setup, and that's actually on the next side. Let me just move my paper right up here. So since that's the width that I'm using, I'm going to use this sort of a layout. So if you look at it, you'll see it says fold, and then there'll be salvages up here. So this fabric is folded in half, and I'm just making sure that when I cut out each piece, I'm actually ending up with 2, unless it's a piece that says it needs to be placed on the fold, such as piece number 14 here. It's placed directly on the fold. I cut out 3 sides, and then when I make sure that since it's placed in the fold, I can open it up and I actually have one piece that's double the size of the pattern piece. So with 16, for example, it's not placed on the fold, but it's very close to it. So you're going to actually be cutting out on 4 sides. Then I'm going to be moving it to another area, placing it upside down, and then cutting it out again, because we need 4 pieces of number 16. So once you have all those pieces cut out, and you'll see that they'll have, the pattern pieces will have arrows, that's for the grain line. So you always want to make sure that these arrows are going in the same direction. So I have 16 with the arrows going parallel to the fold. I'm not just going to take 16 and now it's going to go perpendicular to the fold, because if you have a fabric that has a nap to it, then it's going to look odd once those pieces are sewn together. So after we're done with that, we still need to cut out our lining and our interfacing for the overdress. So that is actually going to be on the back on page 2. So I just need to open this up, turn it around, and you'll see here is the setup for the lining. And they show you again how to lay it out. Only 13 needs to be placed upside down. And there's the setup for the interfacing. So all these pieces need to then be cut out of your interfacing. And again, this, they say fold, so it's folded in a certain way. So then you're able to get 2 of each of the pieces that you cut out. So after you're done with that, then we can move on to marking our fabric pieces. After you finish cutting out your pattern pieces, you're also going to want to look over all your patterns and transfer any marks that are on them to your fabric. So marks would be circles like this or lines like this, because that's definitely going to come into play when we're putting our pieces together. So to do that, you only need to do the ones that are relevant to your size. So this circle has a 12 and this one has an 8. So since I'm doing size 12, I would only have to do the ones with a size 12 next to it. Same thing with the stitching line. I'd only have to do this line and this line right here. This one over here, if it does not have a number associated with it, that means it's for all sizes. So you're going to want to go ahead and transfer these marks, even though it doesn't have your size right next to it. To do that, I'm going to take a straight pin. I'm going to put it through where my mark is, turn it over to the wrong side, and then use my fabric marker to make a mark on my fabric. You can also use a tracing wheel. And if you want to see a demonstration on how to use a tracing wheel to transfer your marks, you can go ahead and watch our tutorial on how to use a tracing wheel. After your marks are complete, and remember, you're going to do any circles and you're going to do the lines as well, then we can move on to the directions and start putting our outfit together. Now we're ready to get started on the directions. So if you look at page 3 at the bottom, you'll see overdress B and D. So this is the start for our directions for doing the overdress. Now you'll see there's written directions on the right, and on the left there are pictures. So each number direction goes with the corresponding number picture over on the left side. To look at these pictures, you'll see that some of them have different shadings. So this kind of shading means that you're looking at the right side of the piece. If it's white, that means it's the wrong side of the piece. And if you see it white with these little symbols in it, that means it's the interfacing. And if it's polka dot, which you could little see right here, and then you can see right here, that means it's the lining. So once you know what each of those means, it's easier for you to interpret the pictures and see what's going on. So in this particular tutorial, we're going to be reading the written directions along with you, and then we're going to be demonstrating what the directions are asking you to do. Let's start with step number 1. Cut 14 pieces of ribbon, each 1.5 inches long. Fold each ribbon in half, forming a loop. On outside, center and pin 7 loops to each bodice front over small dot, having ends extend approximately 1/4 inch over the small dot, based across ends of loop. So for this particular direction, we're going to be working with a piece that came with pattern number 12. So from this pattern, you should have cut out 2 pieces. And you'll see it has a dotted line and then it has little dots. So you should have 7 of these. And you need to transfer these to the right side of your fabric pieces from piece number 12. You're then going to cut your 1/4 inch ribbon into strips. So you have 14 of these and they're 1.5 inches long. What they want you to do is take each one, you're going to fold it in half like that. I'm going to turn it over so my fold is now on this side and my raw edge is on this side. So on my bodice, on the fabric, I'm just going to show on the pattern piece since it's easier to see my dots here. You're going to place it over a dot, but you're going to make sure that the raw edge extends past your dotted line 1/4 inch. So here's my line. This should be 1/4 inch overhanging that. And then you're going to pin it. So here's my actual fabric piece. And you can see I have them all pinned. And I just have to do one more, which is this guy right here. So this is the center, so all the folded side should be meeting in the center. And you see this side has the notches, so all the raw edges are going toward the notches here. So once you have it all pinned, then you're going to do is take it to your machine and you're just going to baste down that dotted line that's at the 1/4 inch mark. So then all your loops are going to be tacked to each of your bodice pieces. So I'm running my basting stitch down my row of ribbons, and when you do a basting stitch, just go ahead and do the largest stitch on your machine, and you don't have to worry about any back stitching. Again, we're just tacking this down. The second part of step 1 is you're going to take another piece of ribbon, and it's going to be the length from the top of your bodice down to the very bottom, and you're going to run it across the ends of your ribbon. So this side should butt up right against your basting stitch you just did, and this side of the ribbon over here should cover up the raw edge of your ribbon loops that you have here. Then you're going to use a regular's width stitch, and you're going to stitch on this side of the ribbon and on this side of the ribbon. So there's going to be 2 stitches on both sides in order to get your ribbon tacked down. So on this one, you're definitely going to do a back stitch on both the top and the bottom for both sets of stitches. Step 2, stitch bodice side front to bodice front at side front seam. Clip curves if necessary. Stitch front to back at side seams. So what we're going to be doing is stitching all our bodice pieces into one long strip. So here's the one that we were just working on. This is the bodice front. So this is piece number 12, and what it wants us to sew is the side front to the front and then the back bodice to the front pieces of the bodice. So I'm going to make this easy. We're going to break it down. So this is piece number 12. Then you have 2 of number 13, and if you look above 13, you'll see it says bodice side front, and here's 14, and underneath it says bodice back. So this is the order that it's going to be going in. It's going to go 12, 13, 14, and then on the other side of 14, it's going to go 13, 12. So 12, 13, 14, 13, 12. So if you line all that up, then that is the strip that you're going to be sewing together. Now, how you know it's going in the right way, let me take off my pattern pieces here. If I look at my piece number 12, now this is all right side facing up, you'll see here it's a solid line, no notches. This has double notches. My side front, number 13 piece next, you'll see on this side it has double notches. So if I lay this together, right side to right side, my double notches line up. So these pieces fit together. It's just like a puzzle. So now what I'm going to do is pin this, stitch it, and for this particular pattern, the standard seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. So whenever you do a seam, you always do 5/8 unless it states otherwise. So okay, so we got one together. Now you see how it kind of curves? So after they stitch it, they just want you to just clip in little inverted notches into the curved area so it'll lie a little bit more flat when we're trying to press it, but I'll show you that part. So this gets stitched together. We'll pretend like that's stitched together. Now if we look at this, single notch on this side, single notch. So then these pieces go together. So after this is already stitched, all I do is just lay it on top of this, pin it, stitch my 5/8 inch seam allowance. So then let's move this down. I'm going to grab my other number 13 right here. Now see, if I was to go like this, I would know right away it doesn't work because single and then there's a double. So I have to flip it so it matches up. So now I'm going to stitch this to this. Same thing. And whenever you do a seam, you always want to press it open afterwards with your iron. And let's say that's stitched together. Then I grab my last number 12, line it up so the double notches are together. Then I place them right side to right side, go ahead, stitch it, and since I have curves in this one, I would do my little inverted notches before I press it open. And then that way you have your one long strip for your bodice piece. When doing your seam, don't forget it's 5/8 of an inch, and then you're just using a regular width stitch. You're not going to forget to back stitch on both sides of it. All right, I'm just getting to the end here, my last one. I'm going to do a couple back stitches. And so this is the one that kind of has the curve. So let me show you the other side, which I've already done. And you can see I've already cut a few inverted notches into it. So this is just to help it because it's a curved area, so it'll lie more flat once you press those seams open. So that's all you need to do for that. Step 3, apply fusible interfacing to wrong side of shoulder strap lining following manufacturer's directions. So there's more to step 3, but let's just take care of the first part. We need to get our interfacing onto our lining. So this is going to be pieces 15, and you should have cut 2 out of your lining, which is this right here, and then 2 out of your interfacing. So you're going to be, I usually make my interfacing a little bit smaller than my piece, so I cut it out and then I just trim it down a little bit more because I don't want to have any interfacing sticking out, and you really don't need it in the seam allowance anyways, so just make it a little bit smaller. I have the bubble side of the interfacing, so you can feel it and you'll actually feel bubbles on it. That goes to the wrong side of your lining piece. So you're just going to carefully lay it down. I already have my iron heating up. I'm going to lay a pressing cloth over it carefully, being careful not to move anything under it. Then just dampen it. And once that's good and damp, I'm going to grab my iron then, and I'm going to carefully press down on it. So that's going to fuse the glue, and the interfacing is now going to stick to our fabric. So after I press down there, I'm just going to press it down in another spot, being careful to actually lift up and set down and not actually shift it because I don't want to cause any wrinkles under there. So I just do it for a few seconds in each area. And then I can lift it up and test it and be like, okay, I need to do a little bit more in this area, but here looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that for my pieces, and then we'll move on to the second part of step 3. The second part of step 3 says, with right sides together, stitch lining to shoulder strap in 3/8 inch seams, leaving ends open, trim seams. So here's one set of my shoulder straps. Here's my main fabric, here's my lining with the interfacing. Right sides are facing up. I'm going to take each one, place it right side to right side, and you'll notice that one side has a slant. That's how you know which one goes with what. Just going to line them up. You're going to pin on the long side of it, and then you're going to stitch 3/8 inch seam allowance. So in this case, no 5/8, it's just 3/8 on this side and on this side. We're going to leave these ends open, and then you're just going to trim your seam allowance a little bit. After I stitched my strap to my lining, I went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance. So you can see I left about, let's say, 1/8 of an inch left on that past my seam. So once you're done with that, you're going to turn it right side out and you're going to press it. And I already have my other one done. So now that's pressed, and that brings us now to step number 4. So for view B, turn strap right side out, which we've done, and press. On outside, pin ribbon slightly away from finished edge of strap with large dots. Stitch close to both long edges of ribbon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a ribbon that's about the length of my strap. And they said they want you to attach the ribbon on the side where you have the large dot. So if we look back at our pattern piece, you'll see one side has a large dot, one side has a small dot, and it kind of slants at a point. So that's going to be this side right here. It's kind of hard to see my dots on this fabric. So all I'm going to do, and you're not putting it completely on the edge, but just a little bit away from the edge because they don't want it, they said slightly away from the edge. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap there. I'm going to go ahead and pin this, and I'm going to do it for both straps. And then just like we did before, you're going to stitch on one side, and then you're going to stitch on the other side using a regular stitch, and don't forget to back stitch on both sides. And with that, we'll be finished with step number 4. Step number 5 is for people who are doing VOD, and the only difference there is instead of a ribbon, you're doing a trim. So after this, we'll move on to step number 6. Step 6, with right sides together, pin straps to bodice side front, matching small and large dots, having raw edges even, based. So here again is my bodice so far. Here's the front, the side front, and the back. So on the side front piece, you should have a series of dots up here at the top. So this is the top portion where it kind of curves outward, and here is the bottom portion, and we have a notch down here. If we look at our original pattern, you'll see these dots here. I marked mine with pins because it's a little hard to see on this fabric. It actually goes this way. So I have my large dot on this side and my small dot on this side. On my strap, on the more flat end, you'll see the same large dot and a small dot. So you're going to take the strap that matches that, and it's going to be right side to right side. Whoops, not that one. Here we go. Large dot, small dot, large dot, small dot, and the right sides together. So all you're going to do is line up the raw edges, and then you're going to base the top. So I'm just going to line this up here. So this raw edge is even. Could go ahead and pin it. And I'm going to do it for the other side front too. So 2 straps are going on at the top. And then just take it to your machine and just baste it so it's tacked down. You don't have to backstitch or anything. Step 7, apply fusible interfacing to raw side of bodice lining sections following manufacturer's directions. Stitch seams of lining sections together, same as for bodice. So we've already done this one time before. You're going to take your lining pieces for 12, 13, and 14, and you're going to attach your fusible interfacing to them, which I've already done here. So once you have that, you're going to stitch them together in the same manner as you did before for your regular bodice. So you have 12 goes to 13, 13 goes to 14, then the other side of 14 goes to 13, and then that goes back to 12. So it goes 12, 13, 14, 13, 12. Just have to make sure that when you place them right side to right side, that your notches all match up. So go ahead, pin it, stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance. If you have curves, you clip your curves and then you press your seams open. Step 8, cut 2 strips of boning for bodice side front lining and 4 strips of boning for bodice back lining, the length of placement line for boning between small dots. At each end, push end of boning out of casing and trim 1/4 inch from boning, curving ends as shown. Slip boning back in casing. So if you were to look at your original pattern piece, this is the bodice side front, you're going to see a line like this. And it even says placement line for boning. So we have for the side front, and then you also have it for the bodice back pieces as well. You have a few lines there. What they want you to do is, and if you were like me and you transfer this to your lining, all you need to do, because it needs to be on the side that has the interfacing like you see here, is I just put a pin through my hole in the back where my mark was, so it comes up through my interfacing. Did the same thing here. Mark those and then draw a line across. So that way I don't have to get my pattern piece and try to figure out where it's supposed to be on my piece. So once you have your line drawn onto your interfacing side of your lining, they want you to take your boning, and this I purchased in a package. It comes in a 2-yard package. And you can see it has a white casing, and I can pull the casing down, and here's the plastic boning inside that casing. Now you can also buy boning by the yard, which is fine. Just make sure that you purchase the kind that has the casing, because we are definitely going to use that, because sometimes you could buy boning and it's just the boning part and there's no casing for it. So you're going to take it, line it up with your line, and then you're going to trim it. Just don't make them all the same size, because the ones for the back are a little bit smaller than the ones for the side front. So you definitely want to make sure that you do each line by itself. So once you have it and it fits, you're going to pull the casing down so you can see the plastic boning. And then you're going to use your scissors and you're going to trim off the edge. You're going to trim off about 1/4 inch, and all they want you to do is kind of round the edge. So it's a little tricky to get that nice curve, but you just kind of have to try the best you can. And I've actually already done it on this side. So it doesn't have the blunt ending, it's more curved at the end. So once you have that, we can move on to step number 9. So step number 9 is actually pretty easy. All you're going to be doing is taking each of your boning in the casing itself, so everything is right back to where it was, and you're going to pin it to each line because we're going to actually stitch this to our lining. So if I pull this down, you can see here it is pinned to my back. And what you want to make sure is you'll notice that the boning has a natural curve. So you always want it to be curving towards your body. This side of the lining is what's going to be touching your body. So I'm actually going to be putting in my boning this way so it curves down towards the table. And then I just pin it like this. So that's the one thing that you definitely want to make sure. But just pin it to all your lines and you should have 6 spots on your lining that you're going to be pinning your boning to. To continue with step 9, stitch close to both edges and ends of casing between small dots using an adjustable zipper foot. So this is what they want you to do. They want you to stitch down the side of the casing. So we're stitching the casing to our lining here. And you just need to make sure that you don't get too close to the center that you're going to be stitching through the actual plastic boning. You don't want to do that. I like to use this thread that's in the casing as my guide here. So either stitch right on top of that line or stitch a little way closer to the edge. So what they want you to do is stitch down the side. Once you get down to the bottom of your casing, you're going to stitch across, getting close to the end of your boning, and then you're going to stitch up the other side and then across on the top. So that's why they want you to use your zipper foot. So you can actually do it in one foul swoop. Just go down, pivot, turn it, stitch across, stitch up, and then stitch across again once you get to the top. Now you can see I'm using a regular foot. In my case, it's easier for me to use a regular foot when I'm stitching on the side, just because the foot sits on top of my boning and I'm able to get really close. In my particular case, if you go my route, you can go ahead and stitch both sides. So I stitch one side, back stitch, cut it, and then I go up the other side. Then separately, I'll take out my zipper foot and I'll stitch both of the ends because we want to enclose that boning inside the casing. That's why you're stitching the ends, so the boning is not going to come out when you're done. So I'm going to go ahead and finish stitching all my boning to my lining, and then we can move on to the next step. Step 10, press under 5/8 of an inch on lower edge of lining with right sides together, pin lining to front edges of bodice, keeping loops out of the way. Stitch front edges, stitching again 1/4 of an inch from raw edge, forming a casing for boning. So we're going to stick in 2 more pieces of boning, and this is going to be right in the front. So here's my lining. What they want you to do first is on the bottom edge of your lining, you're going to press up 5/8 of an inch. So you're just going to fold up to the wrong side, so right side to wrong side. 5/8 of an inch, you're going to pin it, and then you're going to press, which I've already done here. Then you're going to take your lining and you're going to put it to the right side of your main bodice fabric. So right side to right side, and you're going to match up the front edges here because this is the front piece. So this edge here needs to be pinned. I'm going to do this to both sides. Then using a regular stitch, I'm going to stitch a 5/8 inch seam allowance here, and then I'm going to do another stitch, this time a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So from the raw edge, you're going to measure 1/4 of an inch, and you're going to stitch another line, regular stitch, and don't forget to back stitch. This is going to create a little pocket right here in the front, and we're able to take some more boning and we're going to slip it right in this casing. But first, let me go ahead, pin my edges, and then do my 2 sets of stitches. I just sewed my 2 row of stitches here to form my casing, and I just want to point out that I am stitching over my folded edge. So this is part of the casing right here. And you also notice that my main fabric of the bodice is also extending past my lining. That is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So it's only matching up at the top of the bodice and then the edges. Once we have that, we can move on to step number 11, which says cut 2 strips of boning, each the length of stitched front casing, excluding upper and lower seam allowances. Remove boning from casing, trim 1/4 inch of boning from each end, curving ends as shown. Insert boning between seam allowances. Baste 5/8 of an inch from upper edge of casing, basting close to lower pressed edge of lining as shown, being careful not to catch boning. So what you're going to do is cut 2 more pieces of boning, which are going to meet the length of each of your casing on each side. Now you want to start pretty close down to the folded edge of your lining here and extend up to 5/8 of an inch short of the top edge of your bodice, because we don't want any bodice to end up in the seam allowance up here. So you're going to measure down 5/8 of an inch, make a mark from the top edge, and that way you'll know that you don't need to go past that. So I'm going to go ahead, cut my boning, remove it from the casing as before, trim off 1/4 of an inch and try to curve the boning on both sides. Once you have that, you can go ahead, remove the casing because we don't need it anymore since we created our own. Now in all the other cases, we put our boning so it curved downwards towards the table. For the ones that are on the edge, it's actually going to be the opposite. You're going to do it so it curves upward towards you. And the reason is because once we flip the whole thing right side out, these ones on the edge, they switch. So you'll just have to trust me on this since I've made this before and had the same situation. Do it the opposite, upwards. You're going to push in your boning so it goes a little bit past your folded edge here. And once you have that, you're going to baste down here because we need to enclose our casing or enclose our boning so it doesn't come out. And then you're also going to baste at the very top at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you can go ahead and just do that right across there. You don't have to worry about any back stitching or anything like that. Step 12, with right sides together, stitch upper edges of lining and bodice together, matching center back and seams, trim seams. So what we're going to do is we still have our lining on top of our main bodice piece, right sides are together. And you're just going to pin and stitch your standard seam allowance all the way up on the top. So this side that has all the notches, we're not doing that side, just this side. So from here to the very end, you're going to pin, you're going to stitch 5/8 of an inch, and then what you're going to do is trim that seam allowance. So there maybe is 1/4 of an inch left on that, because we're going to get ready for the next step, which is turning it right side out. After I'm done doing my stitching at the top, I went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance down a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to point out is when you're sewing these 2 pieces together, you really want to make sure that all your seams line up. So here's one seam and then here's the other one, and they're perfectly aligned. So you want to make sure that all 4 of these seams and the edges and the center line up. So once you have all that done, we can now move to step 13, which says turn lining to inside press. So what you're going to do is turn this so that the interfacing is now going to be sandwiched between our lining and our main fabric. Once you have everything right side out, you can go ahead and press the edges so everything looks nice and neat. And then we'll move on to step 14. Step 14. For view B, on outside, pin ribbon to bodice slightly below upper edge, turning under ends at front edges. Stitch close to both long edges and ends of ribbon. All right, so you're going to grab your ribbon again, and what we're going to do is be placing the ribbon on this top edge of the bodice, so where you have your strap sticking out. You're going to start at the edge, but instead of just having a raw edge of your ribbon, you're just going to fold this under slightly, like 1/4 of an inch. So that way we have a nice clean edge. And then you're going to pin your ribbon a little ways away from the top. So it's not completely on the edge, it's maybe 1/8 of an inch away from that. and then you're just going to pin all the way till you get to the other side, and just like we did before, you're going to stitch on both the top and the bottom sides of the ribbon. So that's going to hold that and create our trim for the bodice. So we're not going to do step 15 because that's for view D if you're doing the trim instead of doing the ribbon. And after we get this stitched on, we'll move on to step 16. Let's move on to step 16. To edge finish, long unnotched edge of skirt facing, stitch 1/4 inch from edge, turn under a long stitching and stitch or zigzag over edge or overlock serge over edge. So there's more, but let's just take the edge finish first. So in this particular case, now we're going to be working with piece number 17, and you should have 2 of these. You'll notice that one long side has the double notch and the other long side does not. So on this side that does not have the double notch, what you're going to do, this is the side that we're going to be doing our edge finish on. You're just going to stitch 1/4 inch away from the edge, all the way up and down. You're using a regular stitch and go ahead and back stitch here. So you're not stitching any pieces together. You're just lying it flat, single layer, stitch 1/4 inch away from the edge. Then we're going to turn this over so we can see the wrong side. So we'll say this is the side with my stitch. You're going to turn over 1/4 inch to the wrong side. So the line that you just stitched right here is going to end up right on that fold line there. So you're just going to pin it up so you have the stitch on the fold line, and then you're going to stitch again, stitching this piece down. So let me show you my example that I've already done. So this one is done, and you can see it's just folded on this edge and it's been stitched into place. So that's all you have to do in order to edge finish. The second part of step 16 says, with right sides together, stitch skirt front facing to front edge of skirt front, matching notches, trim seam. So here is piece number 16, and you should have cut 4 of these. So one pair we're going to dedicate to the front. So there should be 2 for the front, 2 for the back. So here is one pair of it. I have my right sides together. So on the one side that has the double notch, we're going to sew our front facings. So we're going to have 2 front facings, and each of these is going to get 1. So let me just remove this one. So I'll show you on one, but you're going to do it on both. Move this down. All you're going to do is place it right side to right side, matching up the double notch and the top and the bottom. Go ahead and pin and stitch your standard 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to trim this. After I finish stitching my facing to my skirt front, I'm going to go ahead and trim my seam allowance. So I left about 1/4 inch there. So now we're going to move on to step 17. To understitch, press facing away from skirt front, press seam toward facing, facing side up, stitch close to seam through facing and seam allowance. So all they're saying is now you're going to take your facing and you're going to press it out. So now we can see the right side of the facing and the right side of the skirt. The seam allowance is going to stay closed. So when you press it, here's my seam allowance right here, you're going to press it so the seam allowance ends up underneath your facing. So I can feel it right here underneath my facing. So it's going in this direction. So now we're going to do an understitch. I'm going to start at the beginning here. And I'm going to stitch right on the side of the facing as close as I can get to the seam line. So maybe like an 1/16, 1/8 away. So we're going to be stitching through the facing and through our seam allowance. So it's all going to be attached at that side. So I'm going to start here at the top, use a regular width stitch, and I'm going to remember to back stitch, of course. So I'll go a couple of stitches, do a couple back stitches, and then just sew to the end. And you're going to do this for both of your skirt fronts and making sure that your seam allowance is always under that facing. Step 18, turn facing to inside, press base to upper edge. So this is where we just did our understitch. So here's my facing, here's the top of my skirt, and the top of the skirt is the one where you have the single notch. I have a single notch here on the facing and one up here on the skirt. So all I'm going to do is take my facing, turn it to the inside of the skirt so that my single notches match up with each other. And now that we have the understitch, it should fold pretty easily. And you're going to want to go ahead and press that, which I've already done. So once you have it all lined up, all you're going to do is just baste across the top, so that way we've tacked down our facing to our skirt front. And you're going to do that for both of those again. Step 19, stitch double notch edge of skirt back together. This is the center back seam. So let's take this first part and then we'll go on to the second part of step 19. So you're going to take your other pair of number 16. So remember, we had 2 dedicated to the front, so these 2 are now going to be dedicated to the back. So there's no facing on this one. I have 2 of them. I have them right side to right side. And you're going to stitch from the top to the bottom on the side that has the double notch. One side has a single notch, the other side has a double notch. So this right here is going to be a seam from top to bottom, and this is going to be our center back seam. The second part of step 19 says, stitch skirt front to skirt back at side seams from large dot to upper edge. Back stitch at large dots to reinforce seams. So here is my back. Here's the center back that I just stitched right here. Now you're going to take your 2 front skirt pieces. Here's one of mine. So this is the one that has the facing that we understitched. And I'm going to place it so the side seams match up, and the side seam is the one that has the single notch. So the side that has the facing is going to be towards the center. And all you're going to do is line up this top edge, the notch, and the bottom edge should also line up. Now if you're doing the short overdress, which is view B, that's the one I'm doing, you're actually only going to be doing your standard seam allowance from the top to where you have your mark from your pattern. So it's kind of hard to see in my fabric, so I just put a pin where it is. So from here to here, don't forget to back stitch on both sides, because this from here down is going to stay open. Now if you're doing view D, the lawn overdress, you're going to go ahead and stitch from the top all the way down to wherever the bottom of your skirt ends. So you're doing the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do it for both sides. So this side, and then on the other side of my back I have another side seam. So I'm going to go ahead and place my other front there and stitch that in the same manner. And then don't forget to press your seam allowances open. We're going to skip 20 because we already talked about that. That's just for view D, and go right on to 21. So open out bodice lining and front seam. With right sides together, pin skirt to bodice at waistline seam, matching centers back and side seams. Placing front edge of skirt at front seam as shown. Stitch press seam toward bodice. So here's my skirt right side up. This is the top of the skirt, and you know that because we have the notches at the top. So now we're going to attach our bodice to the top of the skirt. So I'm going to place it right side to right side, and the side of my bodice that has the notches, that's the bottom of the bodice. So the bottom of the bodice gets put to the top of the skirt. So you're just going to line everything up. So the double notches here on my bodice is going to go with the double notches of my skirt. You're going to make sure to keep this lining out of the way. I just sort of pinned where I had pressed it anyway, so it's going to keep out of the way for me. Any place that you have your side seam in the bodice is going to match up with the side seam of the skirt. And then I have another single notch over here that's going to match up with the single notch in my bodice. So when you get to this folded edge here on the edge of your bodice, this is the front, all you're going to do is just unfold it to move it out of the way, and then you're going to stitch it. It's going to overhang a little bit, but that's okay because it should naturally fold over again after you finish stitching it, which is that seam allowance. And then that's fine. So then that covers that, and you're going to have a nice finished edge still here at the end. So all you're going to do is pin this whole area, the skirt to the bodice. You're going to stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to press your seam allowance towards the bodice. So you can go ahead, open out your skirt, open the bodice away from that, and then press your seam allowance up towards the bodice. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this and stitch this, and then we'll move on to the next step. Step 22, turn lining back in place, slip stitch pressed edge of lining over seam. So here's the seam we just created. So this is the one that gets pressed up towards the bodice. So that's already been pressed up. And you'll remember that we had pressed our lining raw edge over 5/8 of an inch. So that's already been done. That was done way back in the step 10. So with it pressed up still, all you're going to do is place your lining over the seam allowance so that the folded edge of the lining now meets up with the stitched edge of your seam. So that's all going to cover your seam allowance. So it's going to look really nice and neat on the inside. So you're just going to pin it, and you're going to make sure that the center of the lining matches the center seam of the back. Your side seams match up. I have one over here and one over here, and the edges match up. So you're just going to place it over there. You can go ahead, pin it in place, and then we'll get a little closer and show you how to do the slip stitch so we can stitch the lining in place. To do the slip stitch, you're going to need to get some thread and a needle, and I've already started mine. So what we're going to do is stitch our lining, the folded edge, to this part where we have our stitching from our seam allowance. So you're only going right on the fold of this fold here, and then you're only grabbing the top layer of your seam allowance here. So I already have it coming out from my main fabric here. So the next thing I'm going to do is grab a little bit of my fold from my lining. Okay, I'm going to pull it through. And now I'm going to grab a little bit of my main fabric, a little ways away from that. And then I'm going to grab my top layer again. So essentially what I'm doing is zigzagging between the two layers. Whoops, and it's caught on my pin right there. There we go. So now that I'm back at my main fabric, I'm going to grab a little bit of the lining. And then go back to my main fabric all the way until the full lining is stitched to the top of your skirt. Step 23, press under 5/8 of an inch on slit opening edges. Stitch 1/4 inch from raw edge, squaring stitch above opening. So let's take this first part. So remember that we only sewed to our mark, and now below that mark to our hemline, it's all opened up. So all they want you to do is on each of the raw sides of your opening, you're going to press 5/8 of an inch. So I have 5/8 of an inch on this side and 5/8 of an inch on this side. Then you're going to take it to your machine. Now you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge of your fold. So about right there. So you're going to stitch up the opening. You're going to go across the top where the seam actually meets, and then you're going to come back down on the other side. So you're just creating more of an open box. So it's open on this side, go up, stitch across, and then stitch down. And you're going to do it for both this slit and the other slit on the other side. To continue with step 23, make jagged edges at lower edge of overdress as shown or as you prefer. Tip: to keep the skirt facing in place at the lower edge, apply a small piece of fusible webbing tape to wrong side of facing a skirt following manufacturer's directions. So let's talk about the tip first, and then we'll worry about the edges. So the tip they're saying is, as you'll probably notice, your facing will keep popping out. So what they suggest you do is get some fusible webbing, which is kind of like interfacing except it's double-sided, and you put it in between these two layers. And when you follow the directions, which involves using the iron, just like with interfacing, it'll stick because it'll fuse the two layers together. So that'll keep your facing on the inside. Another tip you can do if you don't have fusible interfacing on hand, you can just do a couple of tacking stitches with your hand needle. The only problem with that is you're going to see the threads on the right side. So if you do that, make them very small. So we're going to take care of doing the hemline now. So if you're doing view D, you have to do a formal hem. So that's like folding everything up and doing like you would a normal hem. For doing view B, which is what I'm doing, I don't have to worry about the suede cloth frame, which is really nice about using suede cloth. But what I'm going to do is just use my scissors to just cut a raw edge, kind of a jagged edge. So it kind of gives that look that you see on the front cover of the envelope. If you want to keep it easy and make it more uniform, you can just use pinking shears. It's just going to be a very uniform zigzag. I'm going to go ahead and do it by hand so I can get more of that organic jagged edge feel to it. So I'm just going to go all the way around my whole hemline to get that. 24 and 25 is for doing the hem for view D, so we're going to skip to 26. On outside, lace front opening edges together with ribbon through a loop starting at upper edge and tying a bow at the waistline. So you're going to get yourself some ribbon. Make sure that you get plenty of ribbon. This is the same 1/4 inch that I use to do all my trim and my loops. I'm starting up here at the top, and then I'm just weaving in and out, crisscrossing between them, just like I do with shoelaces. So this one is going to go back on this side. And then I'm going to take this one and go through this loop over here. So I'm always going across. You just want to make sure that you don't pull your laces really, really tight, because then you're just going to have to undo them in order to slip this overdress on. So it's better to do it just a little bit looser than you think, so you'll be able to get the dress on comfortably, and then you can always tighten them. So definitely give yourself plenty of ribbon to work with. So after I finish doing these remaining loops, I'm just going to tie it in the bow, and then we can move on to the next step. Step 27. On inside, pin straps to upper edge of back matching small and large dots. You will notice that the straps have extra allowance at the back edge. This is for adjustment. Try on the overdress and adjust the length of the straps so that they fit comfortably. Trim excess if necessary. Hand sew back end of straps to bodice back lining only. So now we're going to attach the rest of our straps because we don't want it flapping around. We want to actually use them. So if you notice on the side of the strap that is not sewn, you should have 2 pairs of dots, or 1 pair of dots. So I have one here and one here. On my back lining piece, I should have a set of dots as well. I have 2 that are right here. So all I'm going to do is match up the marks on my strap with the marks on my bodice, like that. You can go ahead and pin it. Try this on and make sure that it fits. And like they said, it's adjustable. So if you need to let more strap, you can just move this up a little bit, or if you need to tighten it down, you can move it down a little bit. Just get it so that it feels good to you. If I decide like, okay, this is good, you don't need to leave all this on. You can go ahead and trim most of it off. Then you just need to get your hand sewing needle and thread, and you just need to tack down the edges. Now you're only going through the lining, you're not going through the whole bodice, so we're going to see it on the right hand side. If you want to use a slip stitch, that's a good stitch to use. You can go ahead and grab a little bit of the fold of the strap, then a little bit of your lining going around both edges. All right, so did everybody sew on their strap nice and tight? If so, let's move on to step 28, and we're going to start working on our detachable sleeves. So 28, apply fusible interfacing to wrong side of all sleeve lining sections and lower sleeve band lining sections, following manufacturer's directions. So in this case, we're now going to be working with pieces 18, 20, 19, 22, and 21. They're all different parts of the sleeve, and they all need to have their interfacing applied to the lining. So I already went ahead and did that, and you'll see on each piece how much you need to cut out. Of 18 and 22, you only need 2 lining pieces of each. So those are going to have interfacing attached to those. 20, 19, and 21 has 4 pieces of lining each, which also need the interfacing. So once you have all the interfacing applied, just like we've already done, we can move on to the second part of step 28. With right sides together, stitch upper sleeve lining to upper sleeve in 3/8 inch seam, matching large dots, leaving ends open. Trim seams. So they're showing as an example for the upper sleeve, which is piece 18, but you're going to be doing the same exact thing for 19 and 20, so you might as well just do it all at the same time. So you're going to get all your lining pieces that have your interfacing for 18, 19, and 20. Just go ahead and lay them out. I don't have enough room, so I'm only showing the 3. So again, you're going to have 2 of 18, and then 4 of 19, 4 of 20. Then you're going to have your main fabric pieces that are also cut out in these same pieces with the same quantity. So for the main fabric, for 18 I have 2, and then for 19 and 20 I have 4 each. You're going to match up right side to right side of each one of these pieces. So the same thing, I'm going to do it for all my lining pieces for the sleeves, and you'll see on the pattern piece, it'll say upper sleeve, middle sleeve, and this is side sleeve. So it's all the same for both of them. Once they're right side to right side, you'll notice I have the wrong side up here and then the side with the interfacing facing down towards the table. You're going to stitch on each of the long sides here a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So after you stitch it here, and you're using a regular stitch, don't forget to back stitch. You're going to go ahead and trim that seam allowance. So I'm going to go ahead and do it for all of my pieces. Step 29, turn upper sleeve right side out, press baste across ends. So here we have one of our sleeve strips that we just sewed. I went ahead and I trimmed the seam allowance on the sides. You're going to take this and you're going to turn it right side out. So here's one right side out. You're going to press them, and then on each end, each of the short ends, you're just going to baste across. And you don't have to do any back stitch. You're just doing the largest machine stitch that you have, and you're going to do it for all of your strips. As you can see, I've done all of them here. Step 30, with right sides together, pin lining to undersleeve, matching small and large dots. Stitch long, unnotched edges in 3/8 inch seam. Trim seam, clip curves. So now we're going to be dealing with piece number 21. This is undersleeve. So you should have 4 sets. We have 4 of the main fabric, and then we have 4 lining with the interfacing attached to it. So all you're going to do is going to take each set. So I have one of my main fabric. I'm going to take one of my lining with the interfacing, place it right side to right side, and you're going to stitch this side and this curve right here. So you don't stitch across here, you don't stitch down here, just this side and this side. You're going to do this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then for this curved area you're also going to clip little notches into it, because we always like to do that for the curved area, and you're going to trim your seam allowance. So here's one I've already done. You can see I trimmed my seam allowance, so I left about 1/8 of an inch on the edges that I sewed, and here's my little notches in the curved areas only. Step 31, turn undersleeve right side out, press, baste raw edges together. So these are the same pieces of 21. After you stitch them, you're going to turn them right side out and you're going to press them so they look all nice and neat. And then you're going to baste here and here. So you can see I've already done that here. So that's keeping those edges closed, and that's exactly what we want. Step 32, press under 5/8 of an inch on notched edge of lower sleeve band lining. With right sides together, stitch lining to lower band along unnotched edges. Trim seam, press seam toward band. So in this particular case, we're going to be working with pieces number 22. So for your lower sleeve band, the lining sections only, and these are the sections that are your lining with the interfacing. On the long side that has the notches, you're going to press up 5/8 of an inch. So measure it 5/8 of an inch and press it. You're going to do this for both of them. I'm going to flip this to the right side. On the edge that does not have any notches in it at all, you're going to take your main fabric piece of the same number 22 piece, and you're going to line them up. Go ahead, pin them. You're going to stitch your 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to trim it, and you're going to press this up away from each other, making sure that your seam allowance ends up underneath your main piece. And I already have one done here. So now these two are stitched together. If I flip this over to the wrong side, you can see it still has the pressed up edge. Here's my seam allowance going up towards my main piece. Step 33, with right sides together, pin undersleeve to lower band, matching large dots having raw edges even. Pin upper sleeve to lower band in same manner, matching notches and large dots. Pin middle sleeve to lower band in same manner, matching small and large dots. Pin side sleeve to lower band in same manner, matching notches, small and large dots. Stitch entire seam, trim seam, press sleeve sections out, pressing seam toward band. Now I know that sounds like a lot, but essentially all we're doing is we're taking our strips, we're attaching them to the lower sleeve band. So you'll see at one end we have our notches and dots, and here at the top you have notches and you have dots. So you're just basically matching up the dots to the dots here, and you need to make sure you go in the right order. So essentially it's going to go under sleeve, side sleeve, middle sleeve, upper sleeve in the middle. So there's only one upper sleeve, and then there's two of each kind. So let me remove this down here. It's hard to see my dots, so I just mark them with pins. I'm going to start with the under sleeve first, which is on the outside, which is pattern piece number 21. And I have a dot here, so that's going to match up with my dot here on my lower sleeve band. So all I'm going to do, match up the raw edge, and I'm going to pin it. Okay, and then I'm going to take my other one and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So when it opens up, you're going to have your curves on the outside. Then the next one I'm going to do is we'll do the upper sleeve. That one's the one that's going to go in the middle. Double notch here at the end, double notch right here in the middle. And I'm going to pin that. And then you'll notice that, when you put these in, the bands are not going to be right next to each other. There'll be a little bit of a gap, not much, but there will be a little bit of a gap. So next we're going to do the middle sleeve, which goes right on either side of the upper sleeve. So I'm going to turn it. So you'll notice that one side has the dots, so that's the side that goes up to meets the raw edge of the upper sleeve. Pin that. And then pin that. And then last but not least, we have the side sleeve. So all these different components are coming together into one thing. Let's move these out of the way so we don't need these anymore. So then I would pin this one up here, matching the single notches. And then you're going to stitch using the 5/8 inch seam allowance and stitch all the way across. You're going to trim it, and then you're going to press the seam allowance down towards the band, not up towards the sleeve, which I've already have one done. So let me show you that one. There we go. So here they're all stitched, and I went ahead and trimmed it and pressed it down towards this direction. And you'll notice if you place it right, it's going to have a swoop here at the top, and then you have your curves down at the side. So then that's all you need to do for that step. Step 34. With right sides together, stitch entire underarm seam of lower band and undersleeve, matching notches and seams. Clip curves. So here's your sleeve all stitched together. You're going to take this end of the sleeve, fold it over, and bring it over to this side, right sides together. So I'm going to line up this under sleeve area, matching the single notches and the edge, and then also this band part here. So you have single notch, make sure that all matches. I'm going to go ahead, pin, I'm going to stitch it, and go ahead and clip your notches for the curved sections. Step 35, turn lower band lining to inside press, slip stitch, pressed edge of lining over band seam. So all you're going to do at this point is you're going to take this and you're going to flip it to the inside of the sleeve. Like this, so the right side is all on the right side, The lining is all on the lining side. Okay, you're going to go ahead and press this. Now this folded edge should be covering your raw edge from your seam allowance when you sewed these strips on. After you press it, go ahead and pin these, and then all you're going to do is slip stitch the lining to the inside of the sleeve, right where you have those stitches. So that's all going to be hidden there. So you're going to do that all the way around for both sleeves. Step 36, pin each sleeve section together, side by side at upper edge having raw edges even. Stitch along seam line on upper edge of sleeve. To gather upper edge of sleeve between side sleeves, stitch along seam line and 1/4 inch inside seam line using a long machine stitch. Make sure to keep the edges side by side when gathering. So now you're going to take each of your sleeves, and now we're going to attach them here at the top. So all you're going to do is, we'll start with here, which is the under sleeve. You're going to pin it to the one that's next to it. Let me grab my pins. Okay, and then I'm going to pin this one to this one, and then this one to this one, all the way until this goes to this. So these two pieces right here, they don't actually get connected here. You're going to keep them separate. It's just going to be basically one long row up here at top. So you're going to pin them. You're going to stitch them at the seam line. So that's going to be at the 5/8 inch seam line. And then you're going to baste right on that seam line again. And then you're going to baste 1/4 inch inside. So from the seam line, you're going to go up 1/4 inch, and then you're going to baste again. So there's going to be 2 rows of basting, because we're going to use that to help ease the sleeve into the top part of the sleeve. And I already have one done. So you're going to end up with something like this. So here's the side, and you'll see everything's connected at the top. They're right next to each other, side by side, until I get to the other one. Let me flip it over. So this is what it looks like on the inside. All those basting stitches. Step 37, press under 5/8 inch on unnotched edge of upper sleeve band, trim to 1/4 inch. So let's do that, and then we'll do the second part of step 37. So now we're going to be working with piece 23. You should have 2 of these, and they're just in your main fabric. Here's one. So all you're doing is, on the long side that does not have a notch, you're pressing up 5/8 inch. After you press it, you're going to trim this down so there's only 1/4 inch left, which I have an example of right there. The second part of step 37 says, with right sides together, pin sleeve to upper sleeve band, matching notches and small dots. Pull up gathering stitches to fit, baste, stitch entire seam in 3/8 inch seam. Trim seam, press band out, pressing seam toward band. So we're going to take that piece that we just had, piece 23, and we're going to fit it to the top of our sleeve. I put a pin where my mark is on my piece, and this should match the edge of my sleeve here. So this is the skinny part of the sleeve, and there's actually a dot on this side that I can see. So piece 23 is definitely going to overhang the top of the sleeve area. And I'm just going to pin that. I'm going to make sure that my notch in the middle matches. Get this pin through. All right, so I have a notch here, and then I have a notch on my sleeve. So those two must fit. Now you'll notice that my sleeve, though, is not fitting what remains here. So that's why we did the gathering stitch. So you're going to pull your basting stitches, and you're just going to start gathering the sleeve. And we're not trying to create any ruffles or anything like that. We're just trying to ease it in. So I'm just trying to distribute it evenly, making sure that all my panels of my sleeve stay right next to each other, side by side. And once it starts to fit, I can go ahead, pin the rest of it. You're going to baste these 2 pieces together. Then you're going to stitch a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you do that, you can go ahead and trim your seam allowance, so we're just leaving a little bit on, and then you're going to press your band up so your seam allowance is underneath your band. Step 38, fold band with right sides together matching small dots. Stitch ends, trim seams. So here's my upper band stitched to the top of my sleeve, and all I'm going to do is take my band, so the right side is facing up, I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm doing this to each side of my sleeves. You can see I've already done this one, and I'm going to pin it. Then you're going to take it to your machine, and you're going to stitch across your ends this way. So that should be your normal seam allowance. And then after you stitch it, just trim the ends so you're trimming your seams. Step 39, turn band, press, slip stitch pressed edge of band over seam. So here is the side that I just sewed. I'm just going to go ahead and trim it. This is from the last step. You're going to take this band and you're going to flip it right side out now. And if you need to, just get a thing to bring out those corners there. I'm going to turn it over to the wrong side. So this is where we had folded over 5/8 of an inch and then we trimmed to 1/4 of an inch. This was a couple steps ago. So that should still be folded. So now when I fold the upper band in half, this folded edge is going to cover all my seam allowance down here. I'm going to go ahead, pin that down, and then just like we did before, you're going to get your hand sewing needle and you're going to slip stitch this upper band to the top of your sleeve. So that's all going to be enclosed. Oh, and don't forget to press the top so it'll look all nice and neat before you sew it. All right, so for step 40, for view B, on outside, pin ribbon to lower sleeve band slightly above lower edge, turning under and lapping one end at seam. Stitch close to both long edges of ribbon. So all you're going to do is, here is the bottom of my sleeve. This is the lower sleeve band. All you're going to do is now we're going to trim it with our ribbon. So I'm just going to place my ribbon a little ways away from the edge of it, and I'm going to pin it all the way around. When I come back over to this side, I'm going to fold the end of my ribbon and overlap it with where I began. So I would just cover this so we have a nice finished edge and you don't have any raw edges showing. After you have it pinned, go ahead and stitch on both sides of the ribbon, so that's going to stitch it down. The second part of step 40 is for view B. Apply iron-on studs to sleeve, shoulder straps, and upper edge of bodice front as shown on front of envelope. Follow manufacturer's directions. So I'm going to show you how to apply the iron-on studs on my scrap fabric here. This is an optional. You don't have to do this, but it's a nice detail to add to the overdress. So I'm just going to show you how to apply them. So you usually get a packet of iron-on studs from the craft store, and you just need to cut out the individual studs that you need to use. So here is one, and it comes with a backing, and then it has a plastic sticky part that's on top of the actual stud. And you'll notice that I cut it pretty close to the size of my stud. Because I am using suede cloth, if you're using something like cotton that doesn't have any sort of a nap like my suede cloth does, you can probably get away with doing a fairly larger piece, which makes it easier to handle. Here's an example, and you can see here I did a fairly large perimeter around my stud, and here I did it fairly close. The advantage of doing it like this is it's easier for it to stick onto your fabric before you iron it. But obviously you can see where the stickiness was, and no matter what I do, it doesn't seem to go away. So that's why I did it a little bit closer in this one, and it turned out a lot better. But you could just practice on your fabric, and I definitely recommend practicing at least one before you do it onto your dress, because once it sticks, like if you peel off this back, there's a glue that's on the back of the stud, and once that's stuck to your fabric, then that's it. It's really hard to get it off. So that's why you definitely want to be careful. So you need to have your iron set to one of the hottest settings you can get. Whatever setting you use for cotton, that's the setting you want, because the stud really needs to get warmed up in order to get that glue to fuse to the back or to the front of your fabric. We're going to be applying the studs to the right side of the fabric because we want to see it. So I'm going to put this wrong side facing up, and I'm just going to heat up my fabric. Let's get a little toasty there. Flip it back over to the right side. All right, then I'm going to take the backing off of my stud. So now I just have the stud and I have the clear plastic on top, and I'm going to place it wherever I want it to be. And you'll notice the plastic sticks, so that kind of holds it. I'm going to turn it back over. I'm going to place my iron on top of my piece, and I'm going to hold it here for about 10 to 15 seconds. So we're just going to wait for a few seconds, let it heat up. And once it's been about 10 seconds, you don't really want to go over 15 seconds, but once it's been about 10 seconds, then you're just going to move it around in a circular motion over the same area for about 10 more seconds. So after that's passed, and again, you don't really want to go over, you can carefully turn it over, and you're going to let it cool off. So it needs to cool off for about 3 to 5 minutes. I just let it sit. Here's one that's already been sitting. Then you just remove the clear plastic, and there you go. That's how you do one of the iron-on studs. All right, we're on our last step, so we're skipping 41 because that's for view D, for applying the trim instead of the ribbon to your sleeves. So 42. Sew knob half a snaps to lining side of shoulder straps at small dots. On outside, sew socket half a snaps to upper sleeve band at small dots. So first one is I'm going to do the one that's going to be on the inside of my strap. So this is at the top of your bodice. This is the inside of my strap. This is the lining, and I have small dots. I have 4 small dots on each strap that were from my original pattern for this piece, and these dots are indicating where we need to place our snaps. So I'm just going to place it right on that spot, and for this one I'm using the knob side of the snap, and you'll see it sticks out like that. So then I'm going to get my hand sewing needle and thread, and my snap has 4 holes all around it. So I'm going to start at 1 hole, and I'm just going through the lining section. I'm not going through the whole strap to the right side, just through the lining. We don't need to see it on the right hand side. So I'm going to go through 1 hole a few times, making sure that it's secure, because we want to make sure the snap does not come off. And then I'm going to make my way through each one of the holes. So it's going to be secure all the way around. Next, you're going to want to sew the other half of the snaps to the right side of the upper sleeve band. So this is the top of my sleeve, this is the band up here, and you're also going to put the snaps at the marks from your pattern on the band. So this one also has 4 holes all the way around. So you're just going to sew through each hole a few times to make sure that the snap is secure. Just make sure that you place it on the right. So you're placing it onto the right side of the fabric with the socket going in, so then our knob will be able to snap into it. So that's what's great about this, is the sleeves are detachable, so you can wear the overdress with the sleeves or without the sleeves. The only thing left to do at this point is to remove any basting stitches you still have and any fabric markers that are showing. Now your overdress is complete. This is part of Simplicity Pattern 1773. You can see we paired our overdress with the underdress, which is part of the same series. So if you wish to create the underdress, definitely check out our tutorial, which is part of the Medieval Dress series. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 100 sewing video tutorials. New tutorials are released regularly, so make sure to subscribe to be notified of the next release. Thanks for watching!